EWTN.
I don't understand why I have to earn salvation.
1-833-288-3986.
What's stopping?
Why do I need to confess my sins to a priest?
What's stopping you? This is Called to Communion with Dr. David Anders on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
Hey everybody, welcome again to Call to Communion here on EWTN. This is the program for our non-Catholic brothers and sisters. We know that you're out there. We know you're listening to Catholic radio because you have told us so, that you have stumbled across the station, or maybe somebody told you about it and you're thinking, well, okay, maybe they can answer this one question that I have about the Catholic faith. Well, if you haven't heard the answer for that question, you can call today. Here's our phone number, 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. If you're listening to us outside of North America, please dial the U.S. country code and then 205-271-2985. You can also shoot us an email if you prefer that means of communication. The address ctc@ewtn.com. ctc@ewtn.com. Hey, we have the A-team in place ready for your phone call today. Charles Beery, our producer. Matt Gabinski is our phone screener. Jeff Burson handles social media for us. If you want to ask a question via YouTube or Facebook, we're streaming there right now. We are live on this Tuesday afternoon. All you have to do is put that question of yours in the comments box. Jeff will see it. He'll shoot it to us here in Studio One, and we're off to the races. I'm Tom Price, along with Dr. David Anders.
Tom, how are you today?
Very well. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing decent, thank you.
How was that Labor Day weekend of yours?
It was extremely relaxing, bordering on next to comatose.
That's fantastic.
It was marvelous.
We visited family in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, had a wonderful time there, had a little camaraderie with family members. It was fantastic.
Wonderful.
So we're back and very glad to be back. Here's an interesting question from Kelly. Hi, Dr. Anders. A priest and his followers are saying that eventually all Muslims will become Catholic. Another version is that all Muslims will be saved. Another is that the Muslim religion is going to accept the Catholic religion completely. What does the Catholic Church and or the Bible teach about all Muslims receiving salvation? And what does the Catholic Church and or the Bible teach about large numbers of people receiving salvation? Love your show. Thanks so much, Kelly.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. I appreciate the question. Well, the Catholic faith does not teach that all Catholics will be saved.
Yeah.
So if all Muslims are saved, they're getting a better deal than the Catholics, right? That's not the position at all.
Right.
The Catholic Church teaches that anyone can be saved, provided they die with the love of God in their hearts, which is a gift of grace. And the Catholic faith is the public revelation of God concerning the life of grace and the life of the virtues and the life of charity, and it brings with it the means of grace, the visible means of grace, to get that grace into our lives, namely the sacraments of the Church. And so that's the provision that Christ left to bring salvation to the world. And anyone who is saved is going to be saved through the grace of Christ that's mediated by the Catholic Church. Now, that being said, God can get that grace to people in other ways, but in ways known only to God. So the Church does not look at other religious traditions or their putative rites or sacraments as themselves intrinsically efficacious means of grace, the way it looks at the Catholic sacraments, but possibly as occasions where God might sovereignly decide to grant somebody grace because they cooperate with that prevenient grace that he offers to everyone. So that's kind of the Catholic position. In terms of the proportions, there's just really no way for us to handicap that game. Now, the Bible is a little bit ambiguous on the proportionate business because Jesus will say, for example, that the road is narrow that leads to life and few find it, and the road is wide that leads to destruction and many find it. But also we find texts in Scripture that say that God desires that all should be saved, or that Christ came to reconcile all things in heaven and on earth to the Father. So the Church actually prays in its liturgy for the salvation of all. And there is a prayer that Our Lady gave to the children at Fatima, where we pray, it is a Fatima prayer, right, where we pray that God would have mercy on everyone and bring all souls to salvation, especially those most in need of his mercy. So, we don't really know, but we can reasonably hope for, and the Church, in fact, prays for the salvation of all. But if they get saved, it's going to be because they've died with God's grace in their hearts, loving God and loving neighbor, with the grace that Christ won for us and that is mediated by the Catholic Church. One thing we know for sure is that if you die hating God and hating neighbor, it's not looking good for you.
No, not at all. Kelly, thanks so much for your question. Donnell has this one. How does the Catholic Church feel about the use or non-use of extraordinary measures taken at the end of life? Is it okay for a Catholic to have a DNR, do not resuscitate, in place? Thank you, Donnell.
Yeah, thanks. I really appreciate the question. The question about what counts as extraordinary is a little bit contextual, obviously, and kind of depends on your circumstance, your state of life.
Yeah.
A person is not obligated to use every means necessary to extend life. And sometimes the means themselves are far more burdensome than the condition from which one is suffering. And that burden can be not only physical, but it could be social, financial, etc. So, for example, let's say you have a country, place in the world where so standard medical equipment that might be commonplace in the West would be exorbitantly expensive and unaffordable to a family, and might constitute several years of their income. And you might learn, well, if we use this particular treatment, we can keep grandma alive for an extra 6 months. But it's going to mean mortgaging the future of everybody in our family forward 10 years. The Church says you don't have to do that. Life ends. Life ends. People die. And so we can't forestall that forever. On the other hand, you cannot actively kill people. You cannot make a plan to do somebody in. When my own father was dying of Lou Gehrig's disease, he was kind of a cut-to-the-chase sort of person. He said, I don't want to commit suicide, and I don't want my family to murder me. Other than that, I'm good.
Y'all figure it out.
Y'all figure it out, exactly.
Okay, very good. And thank you so much for your question. Again, if you'd like to send us an email for a future show, here's the address, ctc@ewtn.com, ctc@ewtn.com. In a moment, we'll talk with Christine in Las Vegas, also Leon in Blountstown, Florida. A couple of lines open for you right now at 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Call to communion with Dr. David Anders on this Tuesday afternoon here on EWTN. Stay with us.
Hi, I'm Father Mitch Packman. I'm going to be at the EWTN Family Celebration in Phoenix, Arizona. Hope to see you there.
Make your plans now to attend the EWTN Family Celebration October 1st at the Phoenix Convention Center in Phoenix, Arizona. Find out how you can be a part at EWTN.com/family celebration.
Christ is the answer, with Father John Riccardo.
I repeat, I'm sure ad nauseum to the guys who are here, a line from Pope Benedict Emeritus now, who used to say over and over again, to be a Christian is not the result of an ethical choice, but the result of an event, an encounter, a meeting with the living God in the person of Jesus Christ. This and nothing less is what it means to be a Christian. So we said the new evangelization is new in ardor. That's a kind of old-fashioned word. What in the world is ardor? Ardor is zeal, fervor, passion. Are you passionate about Jesus? Passionate about Jesus? Are you zealous for Jesus? Are you fervent for Jesus? Are we fervent for the gospel? Are we passionate about helping this world come to know him?
Glad you're with us for the Tuesday edition of Call to Communion here on EWTN. We have 3 lines open right now at 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Let me tell you about a new book just available now from EWTN Religious Catalog. It is The Mystery of Divine Love by Father Wojciech Giertek. He is the theologian of the Pontifical Household. He aspires to nothing less than giving you intimate eye contact with God. In this book, he reveals how to cultivate the theological and moral virtues in your daily life and how to pray in faith each time that you pray, even when your faith has been challenged. Wow. Great book here, The Mystery of Divine Love by Father Wojciech Giertych. It's available now at EWTNRC.com. Free standard shipping on online orders of $75 or more, so we'll look around, find some wonderful things there, and if it adds up to $75 or more, we'll be glad to pick up the shipping for you. Just use the code FREE at checkout. If you're ready now, let's go to the phones at 833-288-EWTN. Here is Christine in Las Vegas checking us out today on YouTube. Hey, Christine, what's on your mind today?
Hi. My question to Dr. David Andrews is, I had a discussion with a friend over the weekend. He doesn't believe in religion. He says that religion has no real evidence other than man saying so, that it was created to control the masses and is now an institution. And the reason she gave for it is, he says that carbon dating measures the carbon in our bones and it predates religion. Neanderthals are dated 40,000 years ago, Homo sapiens 300,000 years ago, and dinosaurs 65 million years, and the planet is 4.6 billion years. And if Christ founded the church 2,000 years ago, and then the story of Adam and Eve in the Bible doesn't make sense, I guess is what he's saying, and that's why he doesn't believe in religion. So I didn't know how to refute that.
Yeah, thanks. I really appreciate the question. So your friend, of course, has a gross misunderstanding of the nature of biblical revelation and the doctrines of the Catholic faith, and a very narrow conception of what religion consists in. So there are certainly people in the world, they're fundamentalist Christians, who believe that the Bible is a kind of, catch-all guidebook to human life that gives a comprehensive account of things like human origins and, maybe astronomy and various other branches of human knowledge. And it functions as a kind of guidebook or user's manual on the Christian life. That is just not what the Bible is, and it's certainly not what Catholics think about the Bible, nor is it an adequate account of the purpose or nature of religion. Religion is not there just to answer questions about historical oddities. So here's how I would go about this. So first of all, let's take the question of religion more broadly. Sociologists, not just Catholic thinkers, but I think sociologists of religion, going back to Durkheim, would generally describe religion as something like this. The religion is a set of beliefs and practices and rituals ordered toward the sacred, and we'll get to what we mean by the sacred in just a moment, and forming some sort of moral community. So it's restate that, some kind of system of rites and practices and beliefs that bind people together into a kind of moral order that's fundamentally ordered towards a conception of the sacred. That's a very broad definition, and it would encompass the Catholic Church, but many other species of religion as well. And what we mean here by the sacred is something other than the ordinary, something other than the material, economic realities that we all deal with in deficiency mode. I have to figure out how to get a sandwich next week, so I have to go to the grocery store and buy my food, and have to have a job to get the groceries, get the money, and these kinds of concerns that drive most of us in day-to-day life, what we'll call the ordinary sort of way of living. But beyond that, this is sort of what lies at the heart of religious consciousness, religious aspiration. There is a desire for something more, an awareness that there is something more. Augustine would say, Lord, our hearts are restless until they rest in thee. The Greek philosopher Plotinus would be alerted to the allure of the beautiful, something that would call him out of himself. And so this realm of the mysterious and the fascinating and sometimes the horrific, a realm of mystery, the realm of the intelligible, the realm of beauty, the realm of purpose and meaning that calls our hearts to something beyond ourselves, beyond the life of just pure ordinary existence, is the heart and soul of religious consciousness and religious impulse. It is also, I should add, what typically drives things like scientific and philosophical investigation, not being satisfied with the way things are or the way they appear to me. Mm-hmm. The scientist seeks to get to the root of the matter, the way things are in themselves, and brings tools of rigorous statistical analysis to bear on the nature of reality, trying to quantify and measure it and understand that the real world, the ultimate world, is not like the world of appearances. In the same way, so the moral thinker, the moral philosopher, the metaphysician says, the world of appearances, of phenomena, is not the whole thing. There are transcendent realities like justice or truth or fairness or mercy that are real relations in the world. They name real things, and yet they can't be touched with the hands or seen with the eyes or smelled with the nose. This is, again, sort of the heart and soul of religious faith. Now, when you get to the idea of rites and practices, religion exists to kind of shape the consciousness, shape the affections, shape the mentality of a person to help them gain a greater connection to that realm of the mysterious and the transcendent. St. Bonaventure wrote that the entire world is like a ladder by which we can ascend to God. And religious practice, in his great work, The Mind's Journey into God, is a way of sort of pruning away our attachment to the ordinary and to the base and to our concupiscence and pride and our lowly desires that would keep us from that sort of transcendent yearning. So religion here is not functioning as just an ancient holy book to give me instructions about ancient anthropology and the origin of human species, but rather is a mode of being in the world where I can connect to those transcendent values like justice and truth. Now, when you come to the stories of Scripture, so now we're going to narrow it down a little bit more to, say, Christian revelation in the Catholic Church. The way the Catholic Church looks at the Bible, again, is not as a kind of ancient science textbook that answers questions about the age of the earth or the dinosaurs, but rather as presenting narratives that picture some spiritual reality about the relationship of the soul to God and one man to another. So we look at the story of Adam and Eve, for instance, not for information on ancient anthropology or geology, but rather say, the transcendent destiny of the human person, the need for moral behavior, for fidelity, the hope of redemption. These are the kinds of themes that we would draw out of a story that we understand and have always understood to be largely figurative and symbolical. Origen, who was a Catholic thinker from the mid-3rd century, wrote concerning this, well, we know this is not a literal historical truth because it depicts God walking, and we all know from philosophy that God does not have feet. So it can't be taken at that level of analysis. So this isn't a modern Catholic belief. This has always been the position of the Catholic Church. St. Augustine read the story of Adam and Eve and of the creation narrative as an allegory for the creation of the Christian Church, for this mode of being in the world characterized by the love of Christ. So I hope I've given you some ideas about the way Catholics think about these questions, about the nature of the sacred text, the way it intersects with our spiritual lives, and the nature of religion. It's just something so vastly different from what your friend's conception is. Yeah. And I would freely admit dinosaurs existed long before the human person. But dinosaurs, last time I speculated on the question, were not believed by most geologists or paleontologists to be particularly religious animals.
I don't think so. No.
So the question of religion doesn't really pertain for a dinosaur because he more or less is embedded in the question of the ordinary life for the dinosaur and doesn't have a longing after the transcendent. But when human persons emerge on the scene, we find basically from the Upper Paleolithic transition, Homo sapien seems to be a religious creature from the get-go. Cave painting and ritual and things emerge in the archaeological record. There's always been a drive in the human person for a deeper and deeper connection to the transcendent. And the history of humanity is, in fact, a kind of purification of that desire, and we see a more and more sublime conception of the divine realm, culminating ultimately in the person of Jesus and the centrality of the ethical life to that quest.
Christine, is that helpful for you?
Yes, thank you so much.
All right, thank you so much. And that opens up a line for you at 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Call to communion on this Tuesday afternoon here on EWTN. I think you made up a new word, by the way.
Which was?
Symbolical.
Actually, it's not a new word.
No,
I'm not guilty of a neologism. No.
That's a word.
That is an actual word.
How about that? Here is Leon now, a first-time caller in Blountstown, Florida, listening on Sirius XM, channel 130. Leon, what's on your mind today, sir?
Well, first, I'd like to tell both you and Dr. Anders that both you guys were a magnificent resource in my journey to come into full communion with the Catholic Church, and thank you very much for being there.
Well, thank you.
You're certainly earned that. Over the weekend, similar to the previous caller, had a conversation with a 19-year-old family member that I don't have a lot of contact with. She's my granddaughter. And she wound up telling me that she could never believe. We were discussing my spirituality and their spirituality, and wound up telling me that she could not believe in a God that would harden Pharaoh's heart and then drown all the Egyptians in the Red Sea. And I'm fairly literate religiously, and looked in the Interliner Bible, and it looked to me as though when I looked at the translation as it's presented in the Interliner Bible, it shows the Aramaic and English translation exactly, that was more like a warning that my signs and wonders would continue, and of Pharaoh's heart will harden. But she's my granddaughter. I don't want to turn her away from the church by giving her some kind of that's just a misunderstanding of God's intentions. And I didn't know how to answer that appropriately to her, that she could embrace it, but I knew you could.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate the question. So the doctrine of free will is really not the question at the root of the Pharaoh and Moses story. In fact, I don't think the concept emerges in the biblical narrative at all. I mean, the whole notion of free will as a concept really is a patristic doctrine. We find it articulated most clearly in the writings of St. Augustine in the 4th century. Earlier Christian thinkers didn't really talk in terms of free will, and Scripture doesn't really use that category. So I think to bring that to bear, and to say, well, God took away Pharaoh's free will, is to read back into the text a philosophical concept that didn't even exist in the Hebrew text. So it's kind of an anachronism there, right? What the text says is that God hardened Pharaoh's heart. It doesn't say anything about the notion of free will particularly. Now, when we are doing biblical interpretation, we start with the literal sense. The literal sense does not mean, the sort of syntactic, semantic denotation of the individual sentences, the way a fundamentalist would take it, reading it just like it was a newspaper report. That's not what literal sense means. Literal sense means, what was the sacred author's intent in writing the story? What was the main point to be conveyed here? And I think the main point is really a point not so much about Pharaoh as it is about the people of Israel. And if you consider that this text was written centuries after the event, or at least elements of it are, we're talking about the experience of people who have weathered great persecution, themselves trying to live a life of fidelity to God and trying to come up with an explanation for their suffering and their alienation and their exile. And as religious people, they have an idea that's kind of unique in the ancient world, which is that God cares for them specifically and allows these tragedies to happen because he is going to use them to fulfill his covenant purposes. And so that God can work even through the actions of people that mean them harm. And that continues to be a theme throughout all of Old Testament revelation, that God will raise up even pagan empires and pagan kings who mean harm to Israel, harm to Judah, and yet God can work through that to bring out some greater good in their own history. Now, that remains the Christian position today, that God permits evil because he intends to bring out of it a greater good. And so when we suffer evil, our disposition can be one of trusting God, even though we may not see the intelligibility of the thing, right? And so that, of course, includes God's willingness to allow some souls to be, to have hard hearts, right? And to will evil, not because God wills the evil, but he intends to bring some good out of it. Now, I also think that there is a degree of literalism that your granddaughter is bringing to the interpretation of the text that is not the way Catholics read the Old Testament. So oftentimes on this show, you'll hear me cite from St. Gregory of Nyssa, who's he's one of many, but he's particularly exemplary of this point because he wrote a commentary on the life of Moses called The Life of Moses. And he makes it very clear that we should dispense with the literal text if reading it the way a fundamentalist would read it would cause us to think something unworthy of God, like, for example, that God deliberately withdrew the capacity for moral responsibility by destroying somebody's freedom. If that was the way we were reading the text, that would lead us to think something unworthy of God. And it would be better to dispense of the literal text than to besmirch our concept of God. And so Missa, for example, does not take the account of the death of the firstborn as a strict historical account of what actually happened, but rather as an allegory for something like the need to eliminate the first budding seeds of vice in our own hearts. He takes it as an allegory for something in the moral and spiritual state rather than, this is a historical reporting. And so that's, all of these are considerations I would bring to bear on interpreting this text.
Leon, great question. Thanks so much for your call. If you or your granddaughter need to hear that again, we'll have the podcast posted for you in the next hour or so at EWTNradio.net. EWTNradio.net. In a moment, Thomas in Nashville, Susanna in Pennsylvania. Lots more on this edition of Call to Communion with Dr. David Anders on EWTN.
I'm Doug Keck. This is an EWTN bookmark brief, speaking with our good friend here at EWTN and author, Father Wade Menezes, CPM. His book, Catholic Essentials, A Guide to Understanding Key Church Teachings, again, proudly published by EWTN Publishing and, of course, available through our religious catalog. Father Wade, what is this book about and why did you put it together?
I wanted to put together a book to better make us apologists of the faith, to help us be better defenders of the faith. Although I've written it both for Catholics and non-Catholics. For Catholics to be better defenders, better apologists, and for the non-Catholics to understand better what the Church teaches and possibly inspire them to look more at the Catholic faith to possibly enter into it one day.
The book, Catholic Essentials, A Guide to Understanding Key Church Teachings by Father Wade Menezes, and it's available through our EWTN religious catalog. This has been an EWTN bookmark brief. Thanks for stopping by. We'll see you next time.
Want to be notified when Called to Communion goes live on Facebook? Follow EWTN Radio's Facebook page and click the bell icon to be notified.
Faith is a precious gift from God. As the largest religious media network in the world, EWTN has an important role in educating others about our Catholic faith and spreading the good news of salvation. We invite you to explore our numerous pages of historical faith documents, prayers, teachings, and other current issues in Catholicism today. Visit EWTN.com and click Catholicism. EWTN, the Global Catholic Network.
It's important to thrive and not just survive.
Which one best describes you?
Join us tomorrow on Take Two with Jerry and Debbie on most of these EWTN stations.
Now back to Call to Communion.
Call to Communion with Dr. David Anders here on EWTN on this beautiful Tuesday afternoon. Hope it's beautiful where you are. Our phone number here, 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Hey, several of our EWTN radio family members celebrating their anniversaries this week, including Ludington Catholic Voice in Ludington, Michigan. They are celebrating 6 years on the air. Congratulations to Larry and his team at WLCV 103.9 FM, bringing listeners in Ludington 6 years of solid EWTN Catholic radio. Very glad to have you as a member of our family. Let's go now to Thomas in Nashville, listening on the EWTN app. Hey there, Thomas. What's on your mind today?
Hi, Dr. Anders. Hi, Tom. I wanted to ask you about the validity of baptism in the Catholic Church, and it's about two of my children. The first one, our daughter got baptized at a cathedral, and we had stand-ins for my mom and dad. One is my mom is a practicing Catholic, my father is not. The two stand-ins were going through RCIA. My wife was not yet confirmed, so I was the valid Catholic. And the reason this is coming up is because we moved in our new parish. The lady said that both godparents need to be practicing Catholics, confirmed, baptized, and receive the Eucharist, which my father is not. And it made me think about my daughter. Is everything completely still valid in her baptism?
Yes.
Despite, okay.
Yes. The baptism is valid in virtue of the intent of the celebrant and the form of the sacrament. And so you had the proper form. The child was baptized in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit with water poured over the scalp. And the celebrant's intent was to do what the Church intends by baptism. That's all that's necessary for validity. So there are other rules that the Church has in place that are meant to shore up, if you will, the dignity of the sacrament. And while they're necessary under the law, they are not necessary for validity.
There you go. Appreciate that, Thomas. Adrienne and I were once stand-ins for a baptism, and it was for some friends of ours here in town. They were having one of their children baptized, and so the godparents were actually Teresa Tomeo and her husband, Deacon Dom, and so we wore signs around our necks that said, mine said Dominic and hers said Teresa. It was hilarious. Glad to do that.
I was once a confirmation sponsor in absentia.
Cool.
So you can do that too.
Absolutely. Here's Jennifer now, a first-time caller from Petaluma, California, also listening on Sirius XM, Channel 130. Hey, Jennifer, what's on your mind today?
Hi, thank you for taking my call. I was calling because I have about 3 churches within a 25-mile vicinity, and I've recently been wanting to go to adoration. I feel like it's important in people always talk about how important adoration is and spend time with the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
And the 3 churches that are in our area are locked during the day. And the only time they have adoration, I think, is after one of the masses. Like one of the churches has it on Thursday for 30 minutes after church. One has it on Friday for 30 minutes after church. But other than that, there's no place to go to adoration. So I was wanting some advice on what I could do in order to spend time with the Lord when I can't physically spend time with the Lord.
Yes, thank you. I really appreciate the question. So it's wonderful that you want to spend time in Eucharistic adoration, and obviously the fact that it is denied to you in your neighborhood and you've got no way to get to Eucharistic adoration, that's not on you, and so there's no fault here or deficit in your own life. And there's a principle in Catholic sacramental theology that doesn't really apply here, but I'm going to point to it as an analogy. And that was the case of the catechumen who dies though he has not yet received baptism. And the church said, yeah, but he wanted to. He wanted to, and he has the baptism of desire,
Mm-hmm.
right? He's already in a supernatural state because he's got faith, and he's part of the church, and he's in the order of catechumens, and he's being drawn ever more closely into the life of the Lord. And so God decided to take him, but he's not lost because of it.
Mm-hmm.
And that principle there, I think, really pertains that it's the desire for the thing that is the most important. Similarly, Pius XII, when he wrote an encyclical on the liturgy, he said, the outward rite is a sacrifice, to be sure, and that's the teaching of the Council of Trent. The Mass is a sacrifice. But he said there's also an inward sacrifice. And the inward sacrifice is the mind and heart turned to God in the quest of the perfect life. And this is Pope Pius XII writing. He said, guess which one is more important? He said the inward sacrifice is the without that, everything else is a sham.
Sure.
Well, it's not a sham, but it's not doing you your person is not doing you any good
Right.
unless you have that inward sacrifice, which is the most important. And so here again, I think there's this principle that the outward rites of the church, the forms of the church, are there really for the express purpose of eliciting that inward sacrifice, that inward self-donation, that inward longing, that inward desire to give oneself to God. You have that, even in the absence of the outward rite. And so that in itself is a prayer. That in itself
Mm-hmm.
is something worthy and meritorious and to be grateful for. And I think you can fruitfully, profitably exercise that desire in other ways. So, there are adoration chapels that stream images of the Blessed Sacrament. And I'm looking at one right now from the network.
That's right. We have a live camera on the Blessed Sacrament in the EWTN chapel right now. You can look at it on the EWTN app. You can watch it on, I know it's on the Roku stream. It's just for people like you, Jennifer.
Exactly. So there is an option. You can also turn to other Catholic devotions and prayers that are also very powerful and efficacious with that desire to be more closely united to the Lord. Here's one, the Liturgy of the Hours, or the Breviary, which is actually part of the church's liturgy and is prayed every single day, but privately. Can't be prayed together, but can also be prayed privately. A lot of people have not discovered the beauty of the Breviary, can get involved in that. Obviously, the Rosary, of course, I'm sure you are familiar with. And any time that you spend desiring to be drawn more closely into union with our Lord is time well spent and meritorious.
God bless you, Jennifer. Thanks so much for your call. Call to Communion here on EWTN. Let's go to Kathy now in Omaha, listening on the Great Spirit Catholic Radio. Hello, Kathy. What's on your mind today?
Hi, guys. Thanks for taking my call. I'm calling about my youngest sister. She's 61 years old, and she, of course, raised Catholic with all of us, married a Catholic man, but they dropped away from the church many years ago. The kids were baptized, but they never went to church or anything. And they've since divorced. But my sister's oldest son is getting married in October. He came back to the faith due to this beautiful woman that he's marrying, whose requirement for marrying somebody would they be Catholic. Not only has he come back, but he's a Knight of Columbus. But my sister, she goes to Mass Christmas, Easter, and I know she receives communion. We've approached her before about why she's left the church, and all she says is her faith is strong. She talks to Mary all the time. In fact, she gave my husband a miraculous medal when he converted a couple of years ago. But we're fearful, with her son getting married and his fiancé they're so very Catholic, and we're thinking, geez, first of all, she's going to go to the wedding. My sister's going to go to the wedding, and she's probably going to go up for communion. And then later on, when the kids have children, it's going to be really tough for them to try to understand why one grandma doesn't go to Mass when their other grandma does. And when we've approached her in the past, she's kind of shut down, just said her faith is strong, she doesn't need it, blah, blah, blah. Do you have any recommendations on a way to approach her? My other sister and I really want to do this before the wedding in a couple of months.
Yeah, thanks. I really appreciate the question. I do have some recommendations on how to approach her. My recommendation is that you try to exhibit in the character of your own life the virtues that you think she lacks by not regularly practicing her Catholic faith. So the things that you want her to gain in the church, you exhibit those heroically in your own life. That is the best way to approach your sister, and that would mean when you're interacting with her, your primary disposition towards her is charity, benevolence, goodwill, forgiveness, humility, so that you are to her as a light, which is what Jesus told us to be. He told us to be lights. Now, the church has a teaching, about admonishing the sinner as one of the spiritual works of mercy. But moral theologians who are interpreting that say, we don't have an absolute obligation to admonish every sinner for every sin. If we did, we would do nothing but run around admonishing people all day long, and we would fall afoul of Jesus' admonition to us that we take the log out of our own eye before the speck out of our brother's. So how do we do this? How do we actually make a determination about, is this one of those things that I should make an admonition, or is this one of those things where the log in my own eye is bigger and I should, maybe do something else? Well, here's what the church says. Before we admonish somebody, there really need to be three conditions met. First of all, it needs to be something serious. Well, I think that would count. Going to communion when you're not disposed is something serious. But that's just one of the conditions. Here are the other two. Second condition is that I have good reason to believe the person is disposed to listen to me. Now, it sounds right now that is not the case. So that's why I gave the advice that I gave. The only way you can change that, the only way you can make this person disposed to listen to you, is to make her deeply trust you and to really think that you respect her and have her goodwill at heart. That right now, that's not the case. You said that she shut down. Well, most people do. When you come in and approach them with an admonition, tell them to do something wrong, generally they're going to shut down on you. That's normal. It has to be a very intimate and trusting relationship for that not to be the case. The third condition is that even if the person is open to admonition and likely to listen, are you the best person to make the admonition? And among sisters, among brothers, among siblings, among spouses, that is often not the case. It is often not the case that the person best suited to make the admonition is a close relative. I think the person best suited to make the admonition is the ordinary minister of Holy Communion, and that is the priest who would be celebrating the Mass. So if you feel like you have to say something to someone, then I would say something to the celebrant, not to the sister. And the celebrant can say, hey, if you haven't been to confession in, a year and a half and you're not making your Sunday obligation, then, you really shouldn't consider yourself properly disposed to receive Holy Communion, and I would admonish you not to come to communion. This is what we do at EWTN Chapel every time there's Mass, every single day. This kind of admonition is made, but it's made generally to everybody, and so nobody is singled out and has a finger pointed at them, Yeah. And so if you feel like you need to say something, I'd say something to the celebrant. And then in your own relationship, just try to exhibit the life of charity and be that light that Jesus tells us to be.
Great call, Kathy. This is the kind of call that comes up time after time, and we're always glad to answer it in the way you just heard David answer it. Kathy, thanks so much for your call. It's Call to Communion here on EWTN tonight on Mother Angelica Live Classics at 8 p.m. Eastern. Mother this week talks about how anger can be good and bad. Also, when to just let it go and give it to God. Check it out tonight, 8 p.m. Eastern, right here, only here on EWTN Radio and Television. Back to the phones right now for Dan in Ontario, listening on Sirius XM, Channel 130. Hey, Dan, what's on your mind today, sir?
Good afternoon, gentlemen. How are you today?
Doing great. How are you, Dan?
I'm fine, thanks. My question is about conscience and the supremacy of conscience, I guess. Does following my conscience go beyond, say, the teachings, the catechism, or what the Catholic Church actually teaches?
Yeah, thanks. I really appreciate the question. So here's the position on conscience, and here's the position on the moral life. So the Church teaches that the moral good, in any situation at all, the moral good is the good of reason. It is the rational good of the human person. And as such, the moral thing to do can be discerned in most cases by adverting to human reason, to well-formed, prudent reason. And that doesn't mean whatever strikes my whim, but when I'm acting prudently and I'm taking counsel and I've used circumspection and I've considered the circumstances and the nature of the person and the nature of the act, then I could, under normal circumstances, discern the moral thing to do. Let me give you an illustration of how reason can discern the moral good without reference to revelation or the teaching of the catechism. I don't think there's any doubt in anybody's mind that the opioid epidemic in the United States is devastating, and it's very bad for people. It is not in accord with your reasonable good to take opiates for any but the most restrictive medical reasons, right? You don't have to have a PhD in moral theology to discern that. It is evident to reason that you should not take opiates, like for recreational purposes. All right. And sometimes it's a little bit more nuanced, more thinking is required, but that's the way it functions. And that's all moral decision-making has that character. What is the human being for? What are they good for? What can reason discern in this? And whatever that is, that's what you do. Okay. Now, reason can be poorly informed. And conscience is just the verdict of the practical reason. When reason has done its work and tried to discern the reasonable good in a situation, the verdict of that reasoning, the conclusion to that reasoning, is a judgment of conscience. That's what we mean by conscience. Conscience is not some loosey-goosey faculty that just is whatever I feel at the moment, right? That's impulse, that's passion, that's not conscience. Conscience is a judgment of the practical reason. Now, can conscience be badly informed? Yes, of course it can. All right, so I think the case of opiates would be another one in point of fact. Like, so let's say you have somebody who is a recovered opiate addict, and the doctor says, well, you've got to have this knee surgery, so I'm going to write this script for you, and here are these pills, and you can take it. And it's okay because I'm a doctor and you're under my supervision and this is just for a short period of time, all right? The person taking those pills would be a really bad idea for this guy. Could be very bad idea for this guy. But maybe he's ignorant. He doesn't really understand his own risk of relapse well. He's following counsel.
Yeah.
You know, he does what the doctor tells him to do, and then the next thing you know, the guy falls off a cliff. Okay, so how do we evaluate the moral condition of that decision? Is he innocent of any wrongdoing because he really did act in good faith, ignorantly, but in good faith, thinking that he was doing the right thing, not really trying to fall off the wagon, did not want to become addicted again. He was following physician's counsel, but he wasn't in possession of all the facts. Is he culpable? Is he guilty of some grave sin in that circumstance? I would say no. But has he just wrecked his life? Yes. And so when some people hear, well, you have to follow conscience no matter what, they forget that badly formed conscience, even if you're not morally culpable, even if you're not guilty of something, badly formed conscience is still really bad. It's very harmful to you and to other people. So all that by way of preface to saying we must always follow conscience. So if a soul was persuaded in conscience that they had to do something that the catechism forbade, and they were ignorant of the catechism's teaching or of its moral authority, and so they operated in good faith and they were trying to do the right thing, they should follow their conscience, because if you don't follow conscience, there's no other basis for making moral decisions other than the judgment of the practical reason. They'd have to follow conscience. And yet the fact that their conscience was badly formed, the fact that they didn't understand the catechism or its authority, nevertheless, their moral action would still be harmful to themselves and potentially to other people as well. So a lot of people get nervous when they say you should follow conscience, even when it commands you to act against, the teaching of the church. The church says you should follow conscience, but that doesn't give a pass to conscience, right? So a lot of times, particularly in the political realm, somebody will take a position that is contrary to the catechism, and they will plead their conscience. Poppycock, right? That's not the kind of... that what they're doing here is they're excusing bad behavior, justifying it by what they call conscience, which very often is just, it's an appeal to the loosey-goosey faculty and not to the judgment of the practical reason.
And God knows better.
And God is not to be fooled.
Better believe it.
And neither is nature, for that matter.
Well, yeah.
You can plead conscience all day long, but if you fall off the wagon, you're still off the wagon.
Yep. Dan, thanks so much for your call. Here's John in Lincoln, Nebraska, listening on the Great Spirit Catholic Radio. Hello, John. What's on your mind today, sir?
Hey, thanks for taking my call. What's on my mind is money and how the church chooses to spend it. I understand that the church has charities and Catholic social services and stuff like that, but that doesn't always help everybody in every situation, and a lot of times people slip through the cracks. So I guess, I kind of just think of an example, of like a situation like, say, a guy in church gets a tumor and it could be taken care of very quickly, but the church chooses to spend their money to remodel the church rather than take care of this guy's tumor. Well, and then the tumor spreads and the guy dies, but it's okay because the church has new pews, new carpet, whatever. They remodeled their church, so it looks great. But then, the family down, in the back of the church witnesses that, maybe a couple people witness that, and they're like, ooh, maybe instead of dropping $1,000 in the basket this month, we'll use that money to invest in health insurance. That's probably a better idea. And you also see people leave the church because of this. So just wondering how the church decides who deserves this money and who doesn't.
Right. I appreciate the question. So desert has nothing to do with it. I can tell you that right off the bat. And when the church is involved in direct charity, there is not a test for desert before they hand out the charity. There's usually an investigation of the person's objective condition of misery, and the church would prioritize people whose conditions are worse off, regardless of the question of desert, just because we're trying to be the compassionate face of Jesus.
Can you explain the word desert as
deserving?
Deserving. Okay,
yeah.
Very good.
Yeah, I mean, the church doesn't look at people's condition and go, well, you don't deserve to be helped, so we're not going to help you. That's not the way we function, right? No. It's to say, okay, what's your objective condition here, and it's pretty bad, and we want to help you. I will tell you that in my own diocese, we have Catholic Charities appeal, and folks give money to Catholic charities. The vast majority of that money is going directly into various kinds of services to serve the poor and the people of God. Very, very little of it is going towards the actual sort of administrative needs of the diocese. Most of it's going directly into helping people. And when it comes to things like a building campaign, so, the church as an institution is the people of God. It's not just the clergy. It's the entire congregation, the whole diocese, all the people of God together. Cardinal Newman said one time, the church would look silly without the laity, right? And so when you're building a new pew, when you're putting a new roof on, when you're adding a new sound system, that is also for the sake of the people of God. And largely it exists to elicit their charity. So you say, well, how is it that the church exists as an institution capable of helping the poor? Well, it's because of the largesse of the laity.
Mm-hmm.
And what would lead someone to leave their investment banking job over here, or their law practice over there, or their medical practice over there, and give their money to this institution? Well, it's because they've been drawn to the church because of their desire to be united to God. And the sort of the physical architecture of the church, the salary of the priest, the power bill to keep the lights on, are all there at the service of evangelism, ultimately, to draw people to give of themselves to make this kind of charity possible. When I think of the extremely benevolent philanthropists that I know, lay philanthropists in our own diocese, some of whom they've built hospitals and schools and you name it, they've done so much.
Yeah.
Why did they do that? Why did they build hospitals? Why did they build schools? Why did they give all this money to these charitable causes? Well, it's because for generations and generations, their family was in love with Jesus in the Eucharist as they found him in Holy Mass. And, so it's... I don't think you can really separate the sort of the architectural orientation towards the transcendent from the moral transformation of the very people that are doing the philanthropy to make this kind of care of the poor possible.
Appreciate your call. Thanks so much for it. Jason checked in on YouTube. Jason says, I'm new to the rosary, but it's very hard for me to picture Mary praying for the same intention 10 times in a row. Is there something I'm missing that makes saying the prayer 10 times make it more sensible?
Yes, thank you. You are missing something. The point of the 10 times is not to really annoy Mary. Right? That's not the goal. The reason for the repetitions is for our own psychology. See, the rosary is a form of meditation where through the mysteries and through the prayers, we are seeking to draw our own imaginative and affective life more and more into unity with Christ and the Blessed Virgin and God the Father. And so that's the reason for the repetition. It's not because Mary's going to sit on her hands and, I only heard 9 Hail Marys. They're not going to do anything this time. That's not the reason. That's not the rationale for it.
Okay. Appreciate that. And as we're going out the door here, we heard from Lulu watching us on YouTube, and she says, for adoration at our church, people during the coronavirus pandemic, they just pretended that wall wasn't there. They would kneel outside.
There you go.
I think that's pretty cool.
That's beautiful.
All right, Dr. David Anders, thank you, sir.
Thanks, Tom.
Remember that we do this show Monday through Friday here on EWTN Radio, 2 p.m. Eastern for our live show, with an encore at 11 p.m. Eastern. As we mentioned earlier in the hour, you can check out the podcast anytime. Charles, I have that posted for you about an hour from now at EWTNradio.net. EWTNradio.net. Just look for the button that says podcast. On behalf of our fantastic team here, I'm Tom Price along with Dr. David Anders. Hey, thanks for joining us. See you tomorrow right here on EWTN's Call to Communion. God bless.